Welcome to Web Development Lesson 2.2. In this lesson, we're going to see how we can target specific HTML elements and not necessarily all of a particular type. We're going to do that using something called class selectors. So let's get to it. So we're using the same base HTML as in Lesson 2.1, which included a couple of divs, and a little bit of code that exists outside of a div. Inside, we had a couple of H1s, a couple of H3s, a couple of paragraphs. So we want to kind of target certain things. So let's say, and I'm going to duplicate for this example, I'm going to duplicate this section over here. And the reason I want to do that, because let's say that these will be banners to kind of help separate sections on our web page. And this might provide some information, and then we got some information at the very end. So one of the drawbacks of element selectors, which is to specify the element first, what about the element? So let's change the background color of the element to, let's say, blue, is that it's going to target all the elements. So notice all the elements became blue. But what if we only wanted to target this one and this one? This one we kind of want to just leave alone. We don't want to do anything with it just yet. So an element selector, again, the drawback is that it does all the elements. So in order for us to target maybe two of the elements, we have to introduce something else called a class. So I want to make the analogy to a physical class. So we're going to join this div to the class that says, I don't know, let's call it banner. And let's also join this div to the class called banner. Again, think of it like students. So these two students belong to the class that's banner, and this one doesn't. So these two elements are kind of receive the same information, whereas this element won't. It's not part of the class. So let's see, how do we target elements that are part of a class? So let's get rid of this one. So if you're going to use a class selector, the first thing you have to do is you have to specify a period, followed by the class name. So we're not specifying an element at this point. Again, we saw the drawbacks of an element selector. We're going to specify a class name. So we're going to select all the elements that belong to the banner class. And now let's change their background. Only those elements that belong to the banner class. Let's say to black. Now, just by looking at the HTML, hopefully you see a drawback of making a black background. The letters are black as well. So this is probably your first example of seeing multiple properties applied in a CSS rule. Again, the importance of using the semicolon at the end. So let's say color white. Let's run it. And let me pop this out into a separate page. Actually, I already have it. Okay, so we can see here that the first div, which was part of the banner class, and the third div, which was part of the banner class, got the styling. Not this div, though. This div did not get the styling for banner because it wasn't part of the class. And this last piece of code wasn't even in a div or in a class called banner. So what are some other ways that we can kind of select certain elements? So in this particular example, we saw how we selected elements of the same type, but only certain of them. Using class selectors, you have a lot more power in that. Let's say we want to style this heading, and let's create a class called funny. But the H1 isn't the only one that's part of the class. Let's also add the second div to the class funny, and let's add this last paragraph to the class funny. So again, think of it similar to students in a class. not all the students in the class are of the same type. We all have different ethnicities, different nationalities. Similar idea here. This H1, this div, and this paragraph all belong to the class funny, which means now that we can target just those elements using a single CSS rule. So let's review again. If we're going to use a class selector to style certain elements, we put a period first, follow it by the class name, not by the elements, and then we just kind of proceed as normal. So let's change the style, the family of the font to Comic Sans, since it's funny. Colon, and let's say Comic Sans MS, and let's see that work, and we'll do it here. Okay, so let's see what changed. The first heading changed because it was part of the funny class. The second div changed because it was part of the funny class, and also the last paragraph also changed. So notice in the first example, we provided classes to only 2 elements of the same type. In the second example, we provided a class to different elements, but we styled them the same way. So again, there's a lot of flexibility using classes as to which elements get chosen to be styled, as compared to element selectors, which simply styled everything. Now, let me not disprove or not include element selectors. They have their purpose. So for instance, if for some reason we wanted to style all the text in a div and center them, we can do that. So I can say, let's select all the divs. Let's change the alignment of the text to center. So alignment of the text, well, that's text dash align, center. And again, if at any point you're like, when you read a scenario, if you think of a certain thing you want to do and you don't know exactly the property, look it up or take a stab at it with the IDE. So let's see what happens. Now, this is going to be applied to all the divs regardless of class. So you can see here, this div, this div, this div, the text all got aligned to the center. Again, it was regardless of the class. This doesn't get aligned to the center because this little piece of code wasn't inside of a div. This was its own separate H1 and its own separate paragraph. You're going to start seeing more of this as we go through videos, different ways of selecting elements, and then eventually how you can combine different techniques to really target certain elements on a page. So let's go back to our overview slide. So in this video, we saw how we can use class selectors to target certain elements of the same type, as well as certain elements of different types, allowing us more flexibility as to what gets styled. So hopefully you'll get a chance to practice this a little bit more in the future when you start creating your own websites. So enjoy.